Great timing.
Good evening and welcome to the Hawaii Theater Center. I'm Dave Moss, Executive Director of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. We are so thrilled to have you here tonight for Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave. Iggy and Dave.
How are you, Dave?
I'm good, Iggy. How are you?
Do you ever feel like you're Iggy and I'm Dave?
You know, one of these weeks we should switch sides.
Anyway, so we're thrilled to have you today, every Tuesday evening. And tonight we're even more thrilled to welcome a very special guest of honor, Claire Hazard. So Claire has arguably the toughest job in orchestra because she's sitting next to me. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But
I have so
Claire,
many questions.
I'm sure Dave will want to be the fly, somewhere.
Yes.
Claire, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for that.
Sometimes we have very easy questions, but it's been a long 12 months, I guess, Claire. And sometimes you wonder, well, it's just because there's a virus, but do you feel like there's not a purpose, but there's a reason or there's a message or there's something to be learned from the last 12 months? I hate to put you on the spot like that, but, because we all know this pandemic has affected all of us, but is there a silver lining from a, humanity perspective, I guess?
My personal perspective involves my faith. And so I have an understanding of it that gives me a sense of serenity without the panic that I often see on the news and the frustration, which is totally understandable. I understand how people are struggling. And after so many months, almost a year of having their freedoms limited to the degree we've experienced is not natural. And we're social beings. To restrict our interactions is just, at some level, almost inhumane. So it is something we all have to deal with. But I think what has come out of it in terms of the positive aspect of it is that we are all encouraged to adapt. I think a lot of times in many of the cultures that are so-called, they talk about third world countries. And I say, well, what's the first and the second tiers? And with respect to the first and second tiers, our lifestyles are probably a little too wasteful, too spoiled, too self-centered. And we take things for granted. And we are now encouraged to have a more simple perspective and to really watch our relationships and to cherish what's really important.
Very well spoken, yeah. Dave, I never asked you that question. Any time for reflection looking at the last 12 months?
That's a really deep question to start tuning up with.
And I knew Claire would be so articulate and thorough.
I know. There has been quite a bit of time for reflection. I think that being in a new role like this, most of my reflection has come from how we build a resilient and strong future for arts and culture and for our community here and for our musicians and for our audience and how we measure the impact of what we do. It's no longer at this point about bringing 3,000 people together. It's finding ways throughout the week on a daily and hourly basis of, as an organization, touching people in this community and showing value. So I think that there's been a lot of reflection for me on that. I'll tell you, just over the past couple of months, I've tried to be more reflective of, the balance in life that we do have the capacity of going all out 24/7 with a goal in mind. But personally, being in a new place, in a new culture, where there's more emphasis put on balance in life, I've certainly enjoyed that aspect of reflecting on that and spending time with my wife and taking the extra half an hour walk with the dog in the morning and getting up an hour earlier because you can, because it's not -5 degrees like it is in Chicago. So.
Very good. Yeah, I was actually just looking at a picture of Venice. You think of the Piazza San Marco, full of tourists and pigeons, and then we had this pandemic, and a lot of the pigeons are gone. I don't know why it's funny, but a lot of tourists are. Hopefully, we'll be back soon. But anyway, it was maybe a purifying experience. I don't know. Dave, people with questions for Claire, for you, or for myself?
Yes. Questions this evening can be texted to the number below here. And we're already getting some. Actually, questions for Claire and Iggy.
Already?
Are
we getting to the pièce de résistance?
We've touched our audience already this evening with some questions about life on the first stand of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra and what that's really like.
That's the question?
Well, I mean, generally.
Well, I was going to give it maybe another 5-10 minutes, but maybe we'll go, little benchmarks here and there throughout this conversation.
May I? You already asked a very difficult question, but I'm going to ask another difficult question because I've not had the opportunity to spend as much time with Claire as with the other, 83 of our colleagues in the orchestra over the past 12 months here. So I always like to ask the question, take us back to the beginning. How did you arrive as Iggy's stand partner?
There may be a different beginning for Claire than the one that you're meaning to ask her, but...
Go as far back as you'd like. We've got an hour.
For having Iggy as a stand partner,
That's not the beginning.
He asked, but that was the question.
Okay.
That was the beginning. When Iggy came to the orchestra, I was associate concertmaster, and I was fortunate enough to get to know him. As with any working relationship, it takes a while to get to know somebody, how they play, how they operate, and conducts himself on the job and with the orchestra. And I got to appreciate what he contributes, not only to our section, but to the entire string section and then to the whole orchestra. And his relationships with the conductors have been always, I'm noted, very, very cordial and supportive. And it's not always easy in that position when conductor has you try something musically that perhaps runs counter to your musical sense. And it just kind of grates on you internally, but he is the conductor, and there is no right or wrong. So you just go with the interpretation and the flexibility that he extends and the respect by being adaptable to these suggestions is always very encouraging, and so yes, we are following his lead.
And that's the show for tonight. Bye, everyone. No.
Could I ask a follow-up question on this? Because we haven't really talked about this before, Iggy. We are a unique orchestra for many reasons, but one is that we don't have a music director. We have Joanne Folletta, who's our artistic advisor, but the difference between a music director and artistic advisor, they're quite different. So, and Claire, feel free to jump in on this as well. Is your role different in this orchestra, given that we don't have a music director?
Well, Maestro Joanne Folletta has spent so much time with us. that I feel that she's almost like a music director. Now, from a concrete standpoint, yes, the music director would actually spend more weeks here on the islands, but Joanne has been very involved from where she lives on the mainland. I think you're asking a simple question, but what is the role of the first stand, the concertmaster, associate concertmaster? So we want to relay the information of the conductor, and we want them to feel at peace and comfortable so that they feel a kinship to the orchestra. And sometimes, first of all, there are conductors who, if their first time with us, they will always be on their best behavior, and it will be always rosy. But as they come more often, they want to work the orchestra to their artistic vision, and those with great experience and are tactful but able to convey their message, those are the conductors who we enjoy working with. But sometimes it's not always the case. But you were asking about the music director and artistic advisor. I've been in places where, there's... Okay, here's the thing. You have the greatest conductors with the greatest orchestras in Chicago, in New York, other places. But there's a phase, and there's phase one, there's phase two, and there's phase three. So it's always an adjustment. I think where we come into focus, Claire and I, is to try to, no matter what the phase you find yourself in between the conductor and the orchestra, you're always there to kind of act in the best of interest of the conductors. One small anecdote is maybe sometimes I can have a short temper, and sometimes I feel that if I show my short temper to the orchestra, it's sort of a buffer for the conductor, so that the conductor can be kind of with their senses and doesn't have to kind of emote too much frustration or whatever. So I'm not using my short temper as an excuse, but it's one subtle things I may do. But anyway, what I wanted to start today with was that we had some concerts last fall, and because of the pandemic, we had to sit one stand, one person on one stand. So when usually Claire and I sit together, two musicians sharing one stand. There are other orchestras on the mainland where the relationship is such that even before the pandemic, even when they were supposed to share a stand, the concertmaster would have their own stand, the associate concertmaster would have their own stand, the principal second violin would have their own stand, and the associate principal second violin would also have their own stand. So there was a lot of work for the IATSE people, 4 stands, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 chairs together. So with Claire, Claire, the reason why I said that this is the toughest job, her position is the toughest, is because she has to express herself, but she's also not delegating. She's being very reverent to myself. And so sometimes, even if you want to express something very strongly, she's always very careful. And I think this is a skill that is underappreciated. And I think it's also a skill that I've learned to appreciate over the the last few years. When I joined the orchestra, I was sort of young and a little brash, right? So, and it's not things that you learn quickly, it's things that you absorb. And with time, I think, then you find the answers later without actually looking for it. And I think sometimes when you're a young member of the orchestra, you're very eager and you can be very, diplomatic and so forth. But things need to absorb as you learn the ropes and in your career. And not to make a case for being older than my younger colleagues, but sometimes it helps to kind of understand that takes time, no matter, you can't just have an answer on a piece of paper, I think. I don't know if I've answered any of your questions. I'm just like random thoughts going through my head.
No, but watching Claire's response has been worth it. So, no, I appreciate that.
But anyway.
How long had you been in the orchestra before Iggy showed up?
Oh my. Do I have to do the math?
Well, you can. An estimate works.
Well, no, while Claire is counting.
You give me the exact year you came.
So my first year was in the fall of '97. What I wanted to ask, which is related to what you asked, Dave, if you've been through you haven't been through other instrument section, but you've been in the violin section. You've kind of gone through all the, you've said concertmaster, but before that, you were also like in the seconds. And so tell us how is it being in the orchestra, having different perspective and different lenses, being in different positions, different chairs? Do you work differently, or do you react to the conductor differently, or do you react to your section differently to the other sections? I mean, has it taken an adjustment every time you had to move?
I think yes. There are several levels to that. Number one is when you're first with the orchestra. When I was first in the orchestra, I was in the second violin section towards the back, which is fine. But there's a certain perspective that you have, physical perspective. And I think it doesn't matter where you sit in the orchestra, but that physical perspective is a big factor as to how you do your job. There's a delay, there's this sight and distance you have to compensate for. If you can't see what the first stand is doing, and you can't hear them usually, it gets to be very difficult. So I appreciate what the section players provide and contribute to the whole. It's not an easy job, especially if you're sitting way back there and feel like you're not even a part of the orchestra, much less the section. So there's that. And then when you're on the first stand, obviously you really have to focus and try and be with it as much as possible so that you can provide that leadership as a whole, as a unit, not divisive or in any manner, but something that people can latch onto from the back of the section, as well as communicating within that inner circle. And then listening to all the other things that are happening in the brass and percussion is, I had a student once who gave me an article from a scientific journal, and it remarked on the fact that an orchestral musician performs at a level where the multitasking is incredible. Something that is not to be totally understood or appreciated, and that the time that goes into the preparation to be an orchestral musician is more than, and don't take offense, professional, the other professions. This is just something that somebody observed. An astronaut or a surgeon, they have so many years, but we've been playing violin or our respective instruments for, from our youth. So there's a lot of investment in terms of time, resources, and energy. So just from that aspect, I'm not really comparing hours or anything like that.
We know you.
So there's that one brings to wherever you sit in the orchestra.
Right, and you were talking about multitasking, and we have to multitask very quickly, instantly, right? Because the beat is right there, and we all have to be together. Dave, sometimes we have, I hate to take a little parenthesis,
We must.
but we must feed the thirsty.
We must give away a bottle of wine this evening. It is an Obsidian Cabernet Sauvignon from our friends at Hasser Wine here in Chinatown. And we have another lovely charcuterie plate from our friend Terry at Hasser Wines. Thank you, Terry, and thank you to our friends over there. Iggy, I believe we have a quiz question regarding a violinist or two.
Well, Claire and I were talking about the guest artist that we enjoyed performing with, the soloist. And today, two of the recent guest violinists that we really enjoyed hearing and playing with are Augustin Hadelich, who I believe grew up both in Germany but also in Italy, and of course made his way to New York. And the other violinist is Ray Chen. Fantastic, both of them. Very different style. Maybe I'll ask Claire how they differ in terms of style or how she, viewed them. But I believe Augustin performed, was it Tchaikovsky or Beethoven? Beethoven Violin Concerto. And Ray Chen, that's very same season, performed Max Bruch, I believe. Concerto. So the trivia question is, both Augustin and Ray performed an encore. Both performed the very same encore. So they were like months apart, and of course they didn't know that they were going to play the same. So your question is, what piece was that? The encore, they both performed the very same encore. So.
And Iggy, where can people text their answer?
They can text, how is that, Ron? Is that okay? Right here? I feel like I'm getting better at getting a weather job somewhere.
Absolutely. Yes. A little assist from our camera, but
So anyway, Claire, I wanted to. So in the orchestra, we have musicians from outside. They grew up and trained, but we have a substantial number of musicians who are from the grassroots, from here. They train here, and we actually had guests who trained from outside, but we also had guests outside the Symphony. Jake, of course, grew up here, and Lisa Nakamichi grew up here. We had Hana Watanabe. Tell us, when you're born in Hawaii, how did you find inspiration to become a violinist? But even before that, to a love of music. And I think that's what maybe the beginning that you were referring to, not the beginning of when you and I started together, but your beginning. Please, Claire.
Well, it wasn't a love of music. Unfortunately, I was in the 4th grade, but most of my music development is to the credit of symphony musicians. And the first of whom was Dale Bechtel, who was a traveling music resource teacher. And he would administer this standardized music aptitude test. It was called the Seashore Music Aptitude Test. And on the basis of the test results, he would recruit potential orchestra students.
I'm sorry, what was that called, the test?
Seashore Music Aptitude Test.
Seashore Music Aptitude Test.
But, and in my psychology courses, I was informed that test has been ruled invalid. The accusation being that it doesn't test what it claims to. And when I went back to Dale, Mr. Bechtel, with that statement, he read the riot act.
Because the psychology, that's when you went to school as a psychology major, right?
Yes, at the university.
Looking back at that test you took when you were younger.
Right.
Okay.
But my recollection of that test was it was measuring rhythm, pitch, because you wore headphones and it would ask you to compare things, standardized, and I remember it was hours long, and after it was over, I felt exhausted. Just a kid.
And you were only 4 years old?
No, fourth grade.
Fourth grade, okay, sorry.
4 years old, no, not that precocious.
Can I jump in and ask a question, because we just received this. Where in Hawaii did you grow up?
In Honolulu.
Okay.
So I went to Pauoa Elementary School,
Okay.
and that's where Dale administered that exam.
And sorry, another question. The Symphony had this thing called the resource teacher, right?
No, it was a DOE,
It's the
Department of Education. Yeah.
I know later on the Symphony we have those resource teacher, but
Yeah, but he was a traveling one. He would travel with his car loaded with instruments
wow.
to
They
the
wrote a
various
musical
elementary
about that,
schools.
didn't they?
Okay, so you took the test, and he said you are going to be a
Violinist. He just gave it to you based on the instrument size, your size, and everything was proportionate. It was just very practical. And the funny thing was, Dale was a very nice man, but he was a little gruff at times, and I was just this little kid, really, you couldn't get me to say anything. I was too docile. And so he would ask, what are the names of the strings? I guessed wrong. And he started going at me, and I just...
Make you cry?
Yeah, I cried. And the next time I saw him, I was in the 8th grade auditioning for a select orchestra or something, and I told him about that, and he said, I did that?
Wait, so he hands you a violin, and then what? Did you study with someone else?
I just played in the school orchestra.
In the school orchestra.
Started studying with one of the fellow students who was older, and then I started with Art Loventhal, who played in the orchestra.
And Art actually was teaching until very late. I mean, one of my students studied with him actually as late as maybe 5 years ago or something like that.
He's since passed away.
Yeah.
But so Art was my main violin instructor. And I just kept going. It was, I didn't question anything. Here, you play this, okay, I'll just keep working at it. But homework came first, so.
And so did you go through the ranks of the Hawaii Youth Symphony, or?
Yeah, I got into youth symphony in 8th grade because that was all there was. So I was in there for 5 years. Yep, and went through university orchestra when I stayed here. But I did study with others in the symphony over the years. So they were all very supportive all along the way. Didn't matter whether I studied with them personally. They were always very interested.
I remember some articles in the the Honolulu Advertiser or the Star Bulletin, and they were lengthy articles about the education role that back then Honolulu Symphony was playing. It was quite extraordinary.
Yes.
And so then you went to conservatory?
No, I have a very unconventional background. And so don't go by me. I'm the anomaly. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree.
Well, so does Midori anyway.
Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from the University of Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Midori has a degree in psychology, but a lot of those guests that have come have degrees psychology or engineering, it's amazing. I just feel like, and I only have music in my fingers and in my brain, so it's quite. How has psychology affected how you view musicians or colleagues, or how they react to the music?
My slant on psychology has largely to do with learning and acquisition. So how we gain skills, which has been very helpful to me, as well as teaching and working with other people. And so
Right.
it's really been wonderful that way, to have that kind of perspective. Not everybody obviously learns the same way. The traditional way of learning, we know, doesn't work, especially when you're dealing with different cultures. And the traditional book learning is not as effective, especially with the technology we have today. Students just don't have perhaps the discipline. Not all of them, but a lot of them don't have
Patience.
the discipline. Yeah.
When I see you at work, I find that you're very perceptive. I don't know if it's how you were born or your psychology degree, but am I correct to sense that you see a person, you meet them, or you work with them, and maybe it's your instinct, or a guest soloist maybe? Do you find yourself that you're actually right in your perception?
I don't think it's my psychology. I think it's just maybe just my, as you said, maybe an innate sense about people. But I really am very observant. I'm very sensitive. And I pick up on things, perhaps a little too sensitive. Wu Hong in the orchestra says, "You're too serious, you're too serious." I said, "I'm sorry. I'm just that way." But yeah, to be perceptive is a good thing, and it has its drawbacks, as you well know. I mean, I'm not thick-skinned, so it's a hard road to travel.
And that's something I may have discovered through the years is, sometimes when you're young, you just, you just proceed and you just go by the book or go by how you were taught or how you were educated. And then you realize that maybe others have not been taught the same way. It's a whole team concept, I guess. I don't know how you feel, Dave. We talked about your Juilliard years and even playing Hamilton. It's a team of singers, prima donnas, or dancers.
Sure, yeah, lots of drama, lots of personalities. But I think that what I've perceived in the times that I've watched you both on stage is you're both people who think at least 10 steps down the road, and I think that is something that is unique to leading an orchestra. We're taught in music to read ahead. You're playing something, but you're looking 2 bars down the line.
And try not to rush either.
Well, and try not to rush. Steady. Yes, steady. But I think that's unique to having the experience of sitting in the back of the section as well, and to really learning what it's like to have the experience that Ron Artis II had with us. That the orchestra is this massive body that is like a cruise ship steering through a narrow canal. It doesn't take much for it to come off the rails. Yeah.
Claire, do you think that sometimes when you're in the back of the orchestra, the back section should lead more?
Or maybe anticipate. Maybe not lead in the true sense of the word, but anticipate and really be on top.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I would sit in the front and then I play in another orchestra, so I would go back forth in the back, and it was so disconcerting. And truly, I just first of all, you couldn't hear anyone. You didn't know if you were blending with other people, and whatever you heard didn't match what the conductor was doing, more so than usual. And so it was, you felt like you were in no man's land, and then after a while you kind of adjust, hopefully, but it's a struggle. I mean, every position is key, I think, and you cannot play the same way in each chair. Right?
Well, I want to get into the nitty-gritty details about sitting on the first stand of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. And we've talked a little bit about the experience you've had since Iggy's been here. what has stood out? Is there one memory or two memories where you go, that is how I define Iggy? Is it when Jake looks over and he maybe doesn't know where his entrance is next, and Iggy is there, and helping the soloist come in? Is it when there's this little known thing for most audiences, I would guess, that when you have a violin soloist and they break a string, there's a whole line, a whole system that goes into place so that the concert can go on. What stands out in your mind since 1997?
Okay, well, there was an incident, and Akiko Suonai was our soloist, a violinist, wonderful violinist.
Yes.
And she unfortunately broke an E string on her Strad. And protocol was Iggy hands her his violin for her to play so she can continue nonstop. He looks at me, I give him my violin, and I have to restring the soloist's violin. And for a few minutes after I had restrung the violin successfully, I got to play on a Strad. But it is true that Strads take a while. You can't just pick them up and they sound glorious. You have to learn how to play them. They want to be played a certain way. So I found it not as enjoyable as I thought it would be. But it was a nice opportunity. And we went to our respective instruments after that.
Yeah, I remember that moment, and she played, I think, Prokofiev No. 1 violin concerto. And so she snapped a string, and I was in the middle of trying to find an instrument for myself, of course not a Strad, but so I was playing on something that was okay. But maybe like high 4-digit, low, very low 5-digit, and so my friends were telling me that who went to the concert. They said, "Yeah, I saw that. I saw that, and then I saw that when she played on new violin, her sound went like." I'm like, yes, and I also heard one of the member of the orchestra when we're done say, "Well, Iggy's not playing on the Stradivarius," anyway, that also reminds me of when I was a kid, actually, in Paris. I saw Isaac Perlman play, and the same thing happened to him. He was playing Saint-Saëns. And no one noticed because when he changed the violin with the concertmaster, the concertmaster was also playing a Stradivarius, so there was no difference there. So anyway, that's not what happened here. But also what's important to know is that usually the real protocol is soloist breaks the string. Soloist gives the violin to concertmaster. Concertmaster gives the broken string violin to associate concertmaster. And then usually associate concertmaster gives the violin to somewhere in the back of her so that they can change the string, so that as concertmaster playing on Claire's violin, because she had to hand me her violin because she had to take care of the guest soloist violin. So I'm playing, but she should be playing with me so that I'm not just by myself and she's just like changing the string
that
herself.
Noisy?
No, it was very quiet. It was Claire quiet. It was so, but the real protocol is to have someone in the back of the section change the string. But I understand that, Claire, that has happened to you many times when you had to change the E string, and you've always been the one designated you were the designated E string changer?
It seems to have been the case. I had to do it for concertmasters prior. Kathy Lechtenberg broke her E string on Mahler twice. So I got pretty good at it. But I'm more than willing to help. But when it comes to strings breaking, I remember playing the last movement of Brahms first, and I was on the first stand of second violins at that time. G string broke. You cannot play Last Movement of Brahms without a G string. And I didn't have a spare set. And nobody, although I think people behind me knew, nobody was willing to. And I died for the rest of the movement. It was agonizing. That was the last time I went on stage without strings.
Oh. Because like if the E string breaks, you can probably fake your way and play on the but if the G string, then you can't. You don't. Yeah, and so Claire always has a spare string. But I want to get back to something you said, Dave. Something about Jake getting lost and me.
Those were his words.
Right, right.
He was on the show last week. Those were his words.
But what often happens is that actually Claire will kind of point on the music stand before I even have a chance. So sometimes, conductors get lost, even looking at their own music. And so Claire would be like, so then I say, right there. So I take the credit, but sometimes it comes from Claire. Claire, I want to, talk about your other musical activities, but before we do that, are there symphonic pieces that you remember playing with the Hawaii Symphony or Honolulu Symphony that you remember? And then is there maybe a piece that you wanted to talk about today, part of our Off the Beaten Path segment?
Yes, there is. Years ago, when I first joined the orchestra, we had the privilege of San Francisco Ballet Company coming and performing with us in the month of October, usually. And it was always something we look forward to. And that was the one opportunity I had of playing the complete Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev. Incredible music. And we don't get to do that much at all. The only thing we have, though, at our disposal is 3 orchestral suites, which are beautiful. They're excerpted from the ballet itself, which Prokofiev did write. But I don't think we play it often
the whole
enough.
Ballet.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying something that I didn't know myself is the original version of that ballet is kind of different from the actual Shakespeare story?
Prokofiev originally wrote a happy ending. Romeo is prevented from killing himself at the end. Unfortunately, the powers that be in Russia didn't appreciate that idea, and that was nixed. So, and unfortunately for Prokofiev, much of ballet was rewritten reluctantly. So, but even now, the way it exists is just wonderfully beautiful.
So we all know the suites that are performed somewhat often, but we don't know the ballet as much. Dave, we saw you part of Ballet Hawaii Nutcracker. You were an award-winning actor in that special. What is your piece of choice for today's?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask if there was a revival of the Prokofiev in our future.
Let's hope for it. Yes.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. My piece this week, I've been listening to this new violin concerto for looping violin and orchestra.
What's a looping violin?
So, looping is a system of pedals where you record something then it plays it back.
Yeah.
But this has been done for a soloist and a small chamber orchestra. And a friend of mine actually released this a couple of weeks ago here, and it's popped up on some of the Apple charts for music this week. And so it's her name's Alicia Enstrom, and it's violin concerto for looping violin concerto. We'll of course drop the links on the website here. But a former violinist with Cirque du Soleil.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because we did have, I think, the Danny Elfman concerto wasn't the violinist Gastoli. Did she perform with Cirque du Soleil? Possibly. Anyway, my Off the Beaten Path piece, because we didn't get to it last week. Last week I was going to talk about Joseph de Bouillon, who is a African-French composer and violinist, who actually lived around the time of Mozart, so late 1750 something. But anyway, recently I had to do some research for some students, and so Jose White Lafitte is an Afro-Cuban violinist, and his most famous piece is La Bella Cubana, the beautiful Cuban, but he also wrote a nice violin concerto. He went to school in Paris, the conservatory, and was a student of, I have to look up the name, Jean Delphin Allard, who also taught Pablo de Sarasate. So both Jose White Lafitte and Pablo de Sarasate at the same time, studying with the same teacher. So you can imagine maybe the two of them kind of playing their own compositions, maybe Lafitte playing his violin concerto, or Sarasate playing his Navarra or various dances that he wrote, or Carmen arrangements. So today's pieces: Lafitte, Prokofiev, full ballet of Romeo and Juliet.
Full. And looping concerto for violin, electronics, and orchestra.
By?
Alicia Enstrom. Yeah.
Do we have any guesses for today's?
No.
Okay, so it's time for a hint. The Encore was written by a composer who was also a violinist himself, and who wrote pieces he actually called Caprices, and he wrote 24 of them. So you just need to take a guess of who the composer is and the number between 1 and 24.
So can I ask, these two stellar violinists, very different types of violinists, very different sound, very different stage presence, affect, all of those things. What's it like hearing them both play a certain piece in the same season as an encore?
Well, first of all, what it's like to hear them. Sometimes, like, you hear people like them, it's like, okay, I'm done with the violin, I'm just going to bake my apple tart,
Which I hear is quite good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. My mom and then my wife. Anyway, my mom made it, that's why I liked it. Then my wife started to make it, and I liked it, and then I got my hands in it. So from Apple Tart to Augustin Hadlich and Ray Chan.
Ray Chan.
Well, they're very, very different. They're fantastic players. I mean, it's like comparing, I don't know, Lamborghini and a Ferrari. I mean, what's the best car right now? Or like Picasso and Salvatore Dali, right? Oh. So I would say, does Ray Chan play on the Corneri?
I don't
or
know.
Stradivari? I don't remember. But I feel like the craft is different. I feel like Augustin has to shape his tone with the violin he has, and he actually was talking about it. He has a Stradivarius, and he said, as you were saying, Claire, that the Stradivarius he's had to kind of learn to play with it. It was more of a partnership. It's not like you just can dig in and it just bangs through the depth of the concert hall. And so you can feel that in his approach. I'm sitting right, Claire and I are sitting right next to him, and he makes this sound, and you don't feel like he projects you feel it's very intimate in a way, he's playing. But then you ask your friends in the back of the concert hall, and they can hear every note very clearly. So you feel that there's a sort of how he shapes the phrase and the tone, it, in a way there's some intimacy, I feel like. Whereas Ray Chan is very, he just is there and takes no prisoners. And I don't mean to say it in a bad way, but it's like a machine, like it's like boom! And it's so powerful, and and you listen to him, and it's like, oh! Remember those old cassette tape commercial, and the guy's like on his chair and the music, and like you feel the wind and the hair going like that. That's what happens when you listen to Rich. Sorry, that's really how I feel, and they're both amazing. So they play both that piece called Caprice number somewhere between 1 and 24, and if you still don't guess the composer, then we'll give you the composer's name. Then you just need to guess the number. So if there are 24 of you texting 24 different answers, one of you will win the bottle of wine. So that piece has a very slow introduction. It's very loving, and a fiery second half with staccato, and they were both technically flawless. I mean, there are so many double stops and high shift and expressiveness, and you know, you felt like, it was sort of that same perspective I had with Augustin. It was a very intimate moment. With Ray Chen, it was very brilliant. Anyway, I think I'm done for now. Claire, maybe can you share us your perspective?
Is there anything left? I think what impressed me most when I heard Augustin play that Beethoven was the incredible beauty of his sound. I was just, it took my breath away, and it was consistent throughout the piece. And how he gets such sweet sounds way up in those stratospheric notes with such body and delicacy, but yet full sweetness. It's not just saccharine. It's
real.
And it was so lovingly played.
We have to say that Max Bruch is a beloved concerto of everyone. It's very brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think as you get, with the years, you start to appreciate Beethoven more, and just especially the last move. I mean, the slow movement. It just kind of reaches heights that you wouldn't think are attainable. I think that's my.
That reminds me of another piece that should be on Off the Beaten Path. Do you know the double concerto for viola and violin, the Bruch?
No.
I heard it a long time ago. I think one of my former student colleagues recorded it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
We only have 9 minutes left. Claire, I wanted to touch on your achievement outside of the orchestra. We all know the established chamber music Hawaii. Tell us a little bit at the beginning how it started. I understand it was a string wind quintet, but then soon after you were very much involved, and you were integral part of CMH, and you served also on the board. But can you take us to the beginning of chamber music Hawaii?
Well, not the beginning of Chamber Music Hawaii, because that basically was the concept of Marcia Schweitzer, Bill Lightfoot. They were in Spring Wind Quintet. And they wanted to put together a group of 3 ensembles, wind quintet, brass quintet. Honolulu Brass, I believe, might have been in existence by that time. But there was no string quartet, oddly enough. And so they wanted a string quartet. And Karen Bechtel, Dale's daughter, was the one who got together the musicians. It was, I don't know if you know these musicians at all. Karen, Tom Wiley, Doug Buchanan, and they asked me. And I said, me? Really? You want me? And I was more than happy to join that group. And yes, that was the original group. But it morphed with the personnel changed over the years. Kathy Leuchtenberg, who was concertmaster for a while, helped out in the first violin slot. Judy Barrett was in the first violin slot for a while. I left for 1 year. Then they asked me to come back. Lorraine Jones was in the viola slot. But Karen and I were the ones who remained consistent.
And a very, very important integral part of the chamber music scene here in Hawaii, and you made CDs like the songs of Liliu Kalani. You also were very much involved in the music scene in Waikiki, performing with so many different artists. Tell us a little bit, like Hassans or Don Ho and company.
Well, because of my just persisting in music, although not really pursuing it as a major, my name was always out there. And Betty Deeg, who played in the orchestra of viola and violin, was playing with the Don Ho show, and an opening came up, and they called me to sub one night, and so I went. It's a pretty crazy show. They have their music memorized because he just flips through stuff like that, and you have to know the charts. And by you listening to his verbal cues, and you know where he's going. But if you're subbing, it's like music flying. You have this all these cards, like a cards with numbers, and somebody has to help you pull out the music. And anyway, that's how it was. And I eventually ended up playing with that show for 3.5 years before I joined the orchestra. I auditioned for the orchestra.
And I noticed that because, of course, we do all the classical music repertoire, but we do pops, and Dave, you know that when we do pops, Claire is very fast. She knows where the repeat is, the roadmap to every chart, and if a singer gets lost, she knows where they are, and so she's very quick in when we do pops concert, which is a skill that's very important. By the time I find out where I am, the songs, the pop songs are short, so it's already over. Anyway, any closer to a winner, Dave?
No, not any closer to a winner this evening.
Okay, so maybe we'll keep that wine bottle for us. The composer is Niccolò Paganini, and he wrote 24 Caprices. So, you know, it's not the first dozen, it's among the last dozen Caprices.
And we need you to be of drinking age to win the prize.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Drinking age in the US, not in France. So if you're 18 in France, that doesn't work. But in the US, if you're that age, it works.
Okay, well, I hope that will spark an answer. Donard, you don't count. So we're coming to the end of our time, and this is usually when I throw another very challenging question out. And that would be, what does the future of classical music, symphonic music, the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, what does that look like?
I know that we're in this pandemic situation. It's basically contingent on what the government will allow in terms of the physical venues and parameters. My hope is that people will remember that live music is something that is very uniquely personal. It's the only analogy I have is when you grow up looking at a reproduction of a painting, for example, Georges Seurat, Sunday Afternoon. I looked at that painting ever since I was a child in my reference books. And I didn't have any appreciation for it. I thought it was two-dimensional. But when I saw the original in the Art Institute in Chicago, I was dumbstruck by the sheer size and the kind of work and vision that it took to produce such a work. And so it's the same with live music. Yes, you can hear a very well-recorded concert, or you can view a very well videotaped concert, but you don't capture the energy, the communication, any kind of personal involvement, because you weren't there to select what you wanted to watch, what you wanted to focus on, orally, visually, in any other way. And it's an experience that cannot be duplicated. It's like nobody can take a picture as he's riding on a roller coaster and you can feel the gravity and the acceleration in your body. You don't get that. You don't get that unless you yourself are there. And so I would hope people would appreciate that when you are at a live performance, it is a special event and everyone is different and you can make it uniquely yours, something to treasure.
How did we follow that way, Dave?
So well said. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Claire.
My pleasure.
We are looking forward to getting back to in-person live performances. Again, week after week we get closer and closer, and we did have a couple of questions this evening about when is that actually going to happen? Soon. I'm hopeful that in the next couple of weeks here, as we work with our local officials here on the safety plans that we are putting into place and working with our musicians to get people back on stage safely and back to work and really celebrating what we do when we come together and create community and create these experiences around the Hawaii Symphony. So we're close. We're working towards it every day. And
those virtual performances have helped us staying engaged with the community.
Absolutely. And reaching a larger audience that hopefully will understand the value that you just spoke about so eloquently about coming to a live performance and experiencing that firsthand. I know I'm ready for it, and I'm one of the privileged few that's been inside the Hawaii Theater Center as you both have been performing. So we're getting there, and we couldn't do it without your continued support. And it's because of that that's going to be able to bring us back to the stage and create a solid future for this organization going forward so that we can continue to create these live events for our community. So, Claire, I'm so grateful that you joined us this evening. It's a real pleasure to get to spend time with you and to share your stories with our community here. So thank you. And Iggy, thank you as always.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Claire, very much.
Yeah. So we will see you back here next week. I believe we have another power couple, if we may call them that. We will be joined by Anna and Don Womack. So tune in next Tuesday for that, and thank you again for your support, and mahalo.
Thank you.
Life changed so fast.
During COVID, we've had a chance to think about what's really important in our lives.
The arts are an expression of what it's like to be human.
To feel, to help us make sense of our world. Does it mean anything if no one sees it?
Training and dedication are stronger than any virus.
We all need to express ourselves.
Keep doing the things that make you happy.
So when the lights come back up,
We'll all be ready.
For the last 24 years, your nonprofit Historic Hawaii Theater has helped millions of people explore and experience the wonder of music, theater, and culture. From school plays to Broadway shows, from the Brothers Kaz to the Beach Boys, we've transported you from Hawaii to the moon and back. Won't you become a member today and help preserve this last remaining historic show palace? Go to hawaiitheater.com. Become a member today. We can't do it without your support. Mahalo.